afternoon. Good afternoon, Mr. Angel.
Good afternoon.
I wonder, you would agree with me, the RST annuity had a floor of pound 500 per year,
Pound 500?
$2,000 a year.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
So are you aware that pound 500 is the same thing as 2,000 in terms of this court case? The two being the same?
Pound five. Oh, sorry, 500 pounds. I'm sorry. I was picturing 1 pound, 500 something. Right. I understand. 500 pounds. Yes.
Right. So you're aware that the annuity,
Yes.
the treaty itself references
Yes,
the
yes.
initial unaugmented annuity amount as being pound 500.
500 pounds. Yes, I'm aware of
Yes.
that.
And that's equivalent to $2,000 per year.
Yes, that rate of change, $4 to the pound is quite standard in the time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Would you agree with me that the annuity money in RST was intended for RST beneficiaries?
Yes, I would.
And you would agree with me it wasn't intended for RHT beneficiaries?
Yes, I would agree with that.
Would you agree with me that the Batchewana band is an RHT beneficiary band?
Yes, I would.
Can you go to page 70 of your report, which is table D as in David 2?
Mhm.
So the first question I want to ask you about this is under distributions, there's the sum of 485 pounds
Yes, I see that.
and it's 15 pounds short of the 500.
Right.
And are you aware, sir, what the 15 pounds was used for?
Not off the top of my head. It's in the account book, but no, off the top of my head, I don't recall.
Okay, well, maybe we just go to your slide. If I suggested to you that there was 15 pounds taken off for the purpose of defraying the cost of Shinwakon's attendance in 1849, would that ring a bell?
It's possible, but I don't think that detail was in the account, but let's look, maybe it was.
No, I don't believe the detail is in the account. I was wondering.
Oh, yeah, no, I do remember that they paid, they reimbursed for that. I remember that.
Out
yeah.
of the RST account.
Ah, okay, no, I wouldn't remember which account, but no, I remember that he was reimbursed, yes.
When you say he was reimbursed, the government was reimbursed.
Yes,
Out of annuity funds
right,
for 1849 expenditures for Shinwakons and Nebanagoching going
Right.
to, was it Montreal?
was it, yeah.
Maybe
headquarters was
Montreal
still
or
in
Toronto.
Montreal. No, I think it was Montreal, yeah.
Okay. If you look under other expenses, it says between 1855 and 1856, there's transfer to Ojibwe of Lake Huron. And did you look for any explanation as to what that was?
No, I only used what was in the account books. I didn't go past them to try and find explanations for any. Let me think if that's 100% true. Yeah, for all intents and purposes, that's true.
Okay.
Just let me catch up for a moment, please. Okay, thank you.
Now, yesterday in direct, you had a discussion with Ontario Council about what happened with Batchewana. And I thought when I was listening that maybe it hadn't been broken down into what I consider to be actually 3 different kind of discrete events. And I wanted to be clear, the court to be clear on this point. So as I understand it, and we can look at page 71 of your report, part of D2, to try and get this through or get through this, excuse me. So between 1859 and 1865, would you agree with me that the Batchewana band and RHT band was paid out of the RST annuity monies of $2,000, the sum of $101.50 per year?
Just give me a moment, please.
Yes.
Yeah.
They were paid the sum of $101.50 out of the $2,000. I had mentioned that amount as well.
Right, and it was broken out. It was separate. Yeah, there were separate entries from the 1890, 1,898.50. There were between 1859 and 1865. Yes, that's correct.
Right, so what's happened is someone, whoever has recorded this, has recorded that of the $2,000 payable in respect of the RST annuity, $1,898.50 went to the credit of our ST.
Right.
And $101.50 went to the Batchewana band, correct?
Correct.
And you've never tried to understand why that happened.
No, I haven't.
Is it possible that there was an error in the entries made?
Why would there be an entry over the course of 10 years? I don't understand. I've never thought of an error as being the source of it. It seemed to be that there was, it was quite consistent from one year to the next that they were doing this. And then, so no, I didn't think of it being an error.
Right, so it's not an accounting entry error.
No. There are other errors that I've come across, but that's
Right.
not one of them.
Yes, but there was, it looks to you as a historian that for some reason which you have not investigated, there was a decision made to pay Batchewana out of RST funds.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly what I,
And the
Conclude.
years are between 1859 and 1865?
To start, it doesn't get any better.
Oh,
We're gonna go, we just wanted to clear up the stages.
okay.
So the first stage is the one we've just described up to 1865.
Right.
And then from 1866 to 1867, for these 2 years, the RST and Anishinaabe are shortchanged by $101.50 because $101.50 of the $2,000 RST annuity is paid to the Batchewana band.
sorry, I'm not following. Say that again?
Yeah, a similar event happens in 1866 and 1867.
Right.
And it's not recorded in the books that $101.50 went to Batchewana, but we can infer that because of the amounts, correct?
Right, okay. And no, it may also be the case that I neglected to state that the 101.50 went to Batchewana. We would want to go back to the actual ledger books to be sure, or perhaps you have.
Well, you would have no reason to doubt that Batchewana continued to get $101.50.
No, and there's another statement I've seen for Batchewana for this time period, that a current account statement that was prepared by the department, and there wasn't a break in them receiving annuities, and it was through this account.
And can you explain what happens in 1868 and 1869 with respect to Batchewana? Do you know?
I would have to look at the original ledger to be sure. I believe they were still, no, I don't want to speculate. I'd have to look at the ledger.
Would you agree with me that if the distribution in Robinson Superior was $1,923.44, that is less than the $2,000 it should have been?
Actually, I am going to speculate. Just give me a moment.
Reasoned speculation is good.
Yeah, no, we actually touched on this yesterday. I think they're still getting the 101.50 in 1868 and 69. The reason why the distribution is higher, 1923, 1,000, my apologies to the stenographer. The reason the distribution is higher, $1,923.44, is because there was interest credited to that account of
That
$23.
account being which account?
Yes, the credited to the Robinson Superior Treaty-wide account of $23.73. So it can, if we can just add $23.73 to $1,898.50. So it's $1.50 out of that. 22, 20, oh, the math doesn't work perfectly. I was going to say that I thought they had added the interest to the 1,800.
Actually, I thought that even though the math didn't work perfectly, that explanation made perfect sense to me.
Yeah,
But I was hoping you would agree that if they're off by a couple pennies, it's an accounting entry error.
yeah. No, I remember going through, I did the math on this back when I was reviewing the accounts because I wanted to understand why there was a change. And it's because the interest was added and the interest was distributed too, which struck me as a bit unusual. It caught my attention.
The next thing that happens is in 1870. And if you look at page 71, and if you look at the revenue account, the column on revenue and sort of marry it with footnote 150,
Right.
we see that in 1870, $2,030 of the capitalized amount of $40,000 on the RST side
Yes.
was transferred to the Batchewana First Nation. That's what your footnote says.
Correct. To the principal sub account.
Right, but it's transferred to Batchewana's account.
Right, right.
And that leaves therefore, it should leave $2,036.54. Sorry, excuse me. No, that's wrong.
It should leave $37,970. It should leave that.
Right, but
But
why,
they're
why is there
They're
more than that?
overdrawn. It must be because they're overdrawn. Just give me a moment here and I'll see. Yes, there was a deficit. It appears that the interest sub account was overdrawn in the amount of the deficit of 654 was drawn from the principal sub account.
Sorry, 654 was drawn from, you say it was drawn from the principal sub account, but if you look at it, there was an opening balance of 7641.
That's under interest, right? No, okay, sorry, you'll have to bear with me for a sec while I look through this.
Yeah,
Just,
I'm not sure your math works. It's footnote 150.
yeah, okay. Right. Yeah, I'm not understanding why the opening balance is 7641 when I say it was overdrawn. I'd have to go back to the original.
Right,
Yeah.
maybe an accounting error.
It could be, I think it's more likely my error in this case, but yeah. Yeah, but what I think is accurate is that $2,030 is taken out of the principal account and transferred to the Batchewana principal sub account. There is an additional overdrawn amount of $6.54 that's further taken out of the principal sub account of the treaty-wide account.
And who gets that? $6.54.
Yeah, well, it's taken, it would be taken out of who gets it. Sorry, it would come out of the principal sub account and go into the interest sub account to replenish. So whoever had received the benefit of that 654 through the interest sub account, and I don't know off the top of my head.
All right, well, let's go to page 72 of
Okay.
your report and
Okay.
see what happens in 1874.
Sure.
In 1874, $2,036.54, which coincidentally equals the 2,300 and the $6.54
Yes, very good.
um, is transferred back into the RST capital account.
Well, that's the overdrawn then. So the overdrawn is in the
Yes.
Batchawana interest sub-account. Huh, is that what's
Right.
happening? I think it
Yes,
must
that's
be.
what's happened. That's what I think is happening.
Yeah, no,
but
no, that makes
I'm not
sense.
the expert historian.
Well, I also don't have the documents, please. I mean, I don't have every ledger from the time period memorized, and I don't have a photographic memory.
Okay, I don't believe I accuse you of that.
Okay, we'll leave it at that.
So I am suggesting though that what it looks like to me when I read this is that somehow some $2,036.54 of capital monies got taken from Batchawana's account and put back into the RST account in about 1874.
Right,
That's what I think happened.
right. Well, yes, I think that one, that's simple on the face of it. Clearly the money was transferred from Batchawana's principal sub-account back into the RST sub-account. The question that I'm not absolutely certain on is what's the business with that $6.54? And I would have to look at the records. It's that simple.
I'm not sure much is going to turn on it.
No, I tend to agree. But yes, absolutely. The transfer there that you discussed,
Okay.
that did occur.
But again, as you mentioned before, these are all notional accounts. They're not actual $6.54 going from one bank account to another, or are they? In this account, because we're now dealing with Batchawana.
Yeah, so over lunch, I was thinking some more about this idea of notionality and I'll venture an opinion on it, but really I think at a certain point,
If you don't know, you don't have to guess.
no, it's not a question of knowing. It's an accounting concept here. And, oh, I guess you're right. I don't know what the proper accounting interpretation of this would be. I mean, even bank accounts are notional to some degree. In the age that we live in right now, a lot of value is captured in notional record keeping systems. But I like to think of the bank accounts as actually representing physical cash sitting somewhere, but even the bank doesn't have that physical cash, right? I mean, a bank, when it says you have a deposit of X dollars in an account, that doesn't mean that they've got those X dollars sitting in a vault. They only have to retain a portion of it. What they're really doing is promising to be able to pay you that money if called upon, right? So even that's notional to some degree too. So to say that it's notional as if it doesn't exist in some sense, or perhaps I'm putting words in your mouth and I don't mean to do that, but I guess I'm just not sure what the import then is of it being notional, because I think that description applies to other kinds of accounts as well. Fundamentally, accounts are a way of keeping track of who owes whom how much, and based on what series of transactions occurred to get you to that point in time. So when I produce a statement of account, I say that for myself, that I have assets in a certain value, liabilities in a certain value as of a fixed point in time. I can also produce another statement that says how I reached that point from a beginning point. Or if I look after monies for someone else, I can do the same thing. It doesn't mean that those monies physically exist in any particular place. It's just recording the obligations between parties.
So the importance is the obligation between parties, not where the physical money exists.
That is what I would say, yes.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Can you go to table D3 on page 88, please, of your report? Now, table D3 is you looking at Robinson Treaty Band specific accounts, distribution of interest and other income for selected years. And you chose 5 years in particular.
Right.
And this wasn't years that you chose at random, but you chose them because they were demonstrative of in some fashion, or was it random?
Neither. So the principle there is they're every 10 years. So I'm trying to be systematic. It's like when you're taking a sample of something, you want it to be structured around something. So you can take a sample from every 10th year, you can take a sample from every second year. By
Okay.
virtue of how much work was required to do this and how much time I had, I went with every 10 years. Is it, would it have been better to do it every year? You know, so the difference between doing it every year is that that's no longer a sample. So this is just a sample.
But we
and-
don't know that it's a representative sample if there
No, no,
was.
you're absolutely right. And it's the best I could do under the circumstances, and I will not try to suggest that it is representative in a there
in a
there are
statistic-
degrees of confidence that one gives to an analysis of data. I would not treat this with a huge amount of confidence.
Thank you. Can I ask a couple questions about it? Because
Yes.
I think, let's look at Fort William, for example. You had said earlier, maybe I can, it was in your slide deck. When you were looking at these accounts, you said at slide 40, you had a comment about typically First Nations spent most of their money. And you said, well, you know, I'd really have to change that because I haven't looked at anyone other than Fort William and Michipicoten. And you said, for Fort William and Michipicoten, they spent most of the income received as government interest in the year in which it was received. You
Mhm.
made that generalization, and I'm going to suggest to you that looking at the data that you did look at,
Mhm.
it's not fair to say that. And I want to go through it.
Sure, of course, yeah.
So the first thing I want to look at is the Fort William band. And let's look at the year 1907, 1908, just as an example. We have an opening balance of $979.72. And then we have income from interest of $3,643.72. See that?
Sorry, income of 3,000.
$3,643.72. You're not seeing it? We're at Fort
seeing-
William, 1907, 1908.
I'm seeing income of 2,239.45 and 482.20.
We are on a different.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking at Batchawana there. My apologies.
Okay,
yeah. Yeah, okay. Yes, I do see that now.
okay. And you had said in direct that you thought that the 3,643.72 was likely a result of a surrender that Fort William had done. Or in just prior or a few years prior or something.
Yeah, I was speculating, like, not, that wouldn't be the direct proceeds of the surrender, but this is interest on proceeds. That's what I was speculating.
Right, and
Yeah.
there's a reference to a $306.81 amount from other sources,
Right.
but you had no idea where that came from.
Oh, it'll be in the account. I had limited space here and I didn't want to, I couldn't detail exactly every line item in the accounts, or yeah, so it's almost certainly the other sources are identified in the account. We could go and look at it. It's part of the document collection.
All right, so it came from somewhere,
Mhm.
and then you record the total that I added up is $4,930.25 coming in. And I'm going to ask you, unless you want to pull out a calculator, to just accept that my calculator was correct in adding up 979.72, 3,643.72, and $306.81 equals $4,930.25.
Sure, you've walked me through the three sums that you, or
All
the
right.
three amounts. Okay.
So we have $4,930.25 coming in,
Mhm.
and you record two $1,500 payments going out.
Right.
If you deduct $3,000 from $4,930.25, you should be left with $1,930.25, right?
Mhm. That's right.
Yet the closing balance is $944.81 according to the records.
So the distributions aren't all of the outgoing amounts.
So,
There's expenditures as well, right? So I'm not trying to capture all the activity. Please,
no, this is important.
I
This is
apologize
the
if
point I'm
this
trying to
isn't-
make.
I apologize if this isn't as useful as it could be. I really, my preference would have been to transcribe these accounts in full for every year. And then
Right.
we would have those accounts in front of us and we could look through line by line, but that's simply not possible. It's an enormous amount of work. So what I did was I took a sample, as I was saying, every 10th year, and then I summarized in here what I thought were the most salient monetary transactions. So here, what I was trying to get at, as you noticed, I say in the title of the table, distributions of interest and other income. So I was primarily interested not in expenditures on healthcare or food or relief or anything, but on the distribution. So I was just trying to get at how much were they distributing in a given year relative to what was coming in. I didn't try to add up and account for the other expenditures.
All right, so that's one limitation on your table D3.
Yes,
That's
absolutely.
fair enough. Let's go to, if you look at 87 to 88 and 97 to 98,
Mhm.
you'll see that there were no distributions during the year, even though there was interest earned.
Right.
You see that?
Yeah, just give me a moment, please. But 87, 88, the account is in a deficit position. So they couldn't have given a distribution.
Unless they had a
A
nice Indian
sympathetic
agent.
Indian agent, as we discussed, yes. Yes,
All right, so in 80, 97, 98, there's no distributions and there's interest.
yeah, they start out in a, with $70.23. They close at a deficit. So again, I don't think there would be a basis for a distribution there.
Right, the point is that what these records do not show is they do not show that the First Nations spent most of the income received in the account.
Let's get the wording on my statement again so that I can think about it carefully. Can you just read back to me what I said
Slide,
earlier?
slide 40.
It's slide 40.
Yeah, okay, so let's just look at that. Because I do want to be accurate here. for
Yeah, that
sure.
would be good.
Yeah. So the first year that we have for Fort William, all of the available funds were distributed. The second year, there's a deficit in the account, so we're not going to see a distribution. The year after that, there is income, but we end up in a deficit position, so money must have been distributed. And then in the last year, you're quite right, there's still, I think it was $1,900 roughly that was still sitting in the account. So, I'm not uncomfortable saying that given that record with that sample, it looks like they're spending most of the money. But honestly, I mean, this is why I qualified this statement this morning, is because I looked at it and I thought about the fact that we only have 2 RST nations represented in this table. And I don't think that this table does the job it was meant to do for RST. And I'm comfortable saying that. I mean, if I had the opportunity, here's what I would do. If I had the opportunity to go back and do this analysis again for the RST nations, I would do all of them because there are fewer of them. I would at least do this sample of every 10 years, and I would probably have it and do it every 5 years. And then I think we'd have a much better picture.
All right, so you're walking back a bit from your generalized statement that they spent most of the income received in the RST area.
No, I just finished walking through Fort William, and I think the record with respect to Fort William does suggest that, but I wouldn't place too much weight on it.
All right, let's just go see what Michipicoten has to
Sure.
say, because let's square that circle. When you look at Michipicoten, and this is over at page 92 and 93, because the way
Yeah, it's unfortunate.
it's unfortunate, but the data you need is on the top of page 93.
Okay.
And in 1867 and to 1868, there's no distributions.
Mhm.
In 1877, 78, there is a distribution of all the interest.
Mhm.
You have to say.
Oh,
it.
I'm sorry. Yes, yes. Apologies.
Yes, in, I'm gonna leave 1887 and 1888 for a moment because that's an odd year. There's something happening here. But in 97 to 98, there's no distributions of interest.
Yes,
You agree with me?
yes,
And in 1907 and 1908, there's no distributions during the year of interest. You agree with me?
yes, but they're in a deficit position, so they're not in,
Now, let's take a look for a moment of 87 to 88. We have an opening balance, this is over on page 92, of $10.65 and a closing balance of $10.67. And then you have income from government interest of $54.44. If $54.44 comes in and $10.65 already was there, by my math, that's a total of $65.09 to spend.
okay,
If you spend $33.98 of $65.09, you don't have a deficit of $2.94. You have you're still in the plus side of $21.11. Would you agree?
no, because this is what I explained before. There's other expenditures. The interest distributions aren't the only outflows from the account. And there are other expenditures that I didn't record here because the primary purpose of this table was to capture the distribution of funds out to the First Nation.
Right, but the $33.98 to suggest that they're spending all of the interest ignores the fact that there was $54.44 there already.
No, so there's income of interest of $54.44. Out of that amount, there's a distribution of $33.98.
So they're not spending all of their interest.
Well, I didn't say all. I said they spend most of it.
Well, that's not most of it.
Okay,
My suggestion to you, sir, is that your own data does not suggest that the First Nations were spending most of the income received as government interest during the years you looked at them. Would you agree?
no, I'll repeat how I would interpret the data and what I would say about it is that for the two nations we've looked at, it looks as if the interest monies are being distributed. Most of the interest monies are being distributed to the extent that that there are distributions, but that this is a very small sample and we really shouldn't be putting weight on it. The reason why I qualified this in the morning is because I don't want the court to be misled. And
Okay.
I don't think that the two examples we have here should be taken as representative of what was occurring with the Robinson Superior Nations.
Thank you, sir. I wonder if I just want to also clarify your statement at slide 40, where you say the First Nations spent most of the income. What you mean to say is that the government paid out to the First Nations income.
I thought you were going to say something else. So
What did you think I was going to say?
I thought you were going to say the government spent most of it, and that would be, fairly true. you know, given the conversation we had earlier about
That comes in two
This-
questions, but you've answered, you've seen, foresaw where I was going with part of it.
okay,
That's good. But the point is that it's the government putting money out and when you say spent, we don't know how it was spent by the First Nations when they got it.
oh, okay, no. You see, this is the disadvantage of not looking at the actual trust accounts. We do know what's happening to it. X number of dollars is spent on relief supplies, X number of dollars is spent on medicines, reimbursing a doctor for attendance or road upkeep or whatever. So we do have a picture of how it's spent. But I
Okay.
think the salient point is that who's making the decisions around the spending there?
Right, and that's a difficult thing because you really don't know because of the government sometimes making expenditures without the
Mhm.
permission of the First Nation.
Right.
And sometimes they would work together and the First Nation would agree with the expenditure.
In this, yes, in this time period, it gets much more rigorous and controlled as you move into the later 20th century. But in
Yeah.
this time period we're talking about,
Could I just make sure I understand that? So when Mr. Schachter asked the question, or sorry, when you gave the answer, we do know what's happening to it. X number of dollars is spent on relief, X number of dollars is spent on medicines, X number on a doctor for attendance or for road upkeep. Those are expenditures prior to any distribution. Or outside of a distribution,
outside of, alongside of,
but they're separate from
Separate from.
distributions.
correct. So distributions are money in the hands of community members. They actually receive cash dollars.
Thank you.
But distributions are, sorry, I won't call them distributions. I'll call them payouts. Is that
For what?
for community purposes?
Sorry, I'm just not following.
What we, for example, building a road or building a school
Okay,
or advancing education or
Mhm.
medical expenditures, those benefit some of them individual members who are sick, or
sure.
perhaps there was a clinic where people many people received medicine to ward off tuberculosis, if there was such a thing, I don't know. But these are monies that the community, that benefited the community as opposed to individuals.
That's right. Yeah, those
A-
expenditures, that's actually a very good way of thinking about it, is that expenditures out of the band accounts, the interest sub accounts, were meant to be for the benefit of the community as a whole. That is typically, I don't know that you would find that in any policy or regulation, and there's very little of that in this time period. But yes, that is the case, whereas distributions go to the individual. The one exception to that would be salaries for chiefs or counselors.
Yes.
But in that case, they're band officials, and so their salaries, it's appropriate that it goes to an individual there.
It's my understanding that the level of confidence in the accounts is wanting over the years. And I want to read to you a passage from Joan Holmes and ask if you, her report from 2009, and ask you if you agree with it. She writes, and this is, I think, the last paragraph of her report. Finally, the 1951 Act provided for the devolution of authority to bands to manage their revenue. The department seemingly did not anticipate the deluge of requests from bands to assume such authority. Now, I'm going to stop there for a moment. Would you agree with that?
I don't know the historical record well enough to say whether there was a deluge. I've seen requests after the Indian Act in 1951 for managing revenue, but I don't know enough to say if it was a deluge.
Okay. She then continues, regulations guiding the management of devolved revenue funds were captured in orders in council drawn up on a band by band basis until 1973, when the process was deemed to be too onerous. You're smiling. You're familiar with that passage?
I am, well, I'm familiar with that process.
And
Yes.
would you agree that that's a true statement?
Yes, as far as I can recall it, that sounds right.
She continues, the devolution, however, led to other and unanticipated problems and to demands from bands to assume management of capital. Are you aware that that happened?
Yes, definitely. That's been a long-standing demand. Yes.
She then continues, the act, she's referring to the Indian Act, I think, was amended and consolidated in 1985. So that is the Indian Act, correct?
Correct.
She then says, more than a century later, accounting problems now attributable to the method of recording expenditures and credits continue today. And this is she's writing in 2009.
Mhm.
So would you agree with her that more than a century later in 2009, accounting problems continue?
So I'll say a couple things about that. This is a concluding paragraph to a lengthy report, and she's making a very broad, or the person who wrote that report is making quite a broad statement by way of summarizing where things are at. And there's absolutely no question that there were still issues at play in the 1990s around the proper recording of expenditures, and there were accounting issues I'm aware of in the 1990s. Yes, I think we just have to be careful here not to, and I'm not trying to defend to try and say that this is a gold standard of accounting, right? And I'm not in any position to make
Well,
that.
I wouldn't
But-
even use the word gold standard with some of these accounts.
No, exactly. I'm just trying, I just don't want us to be too. Sorry, I'm just trying to think how best to explain this. It's not that the Indian accounts, certainly in the 20th century, can't be relied upon at all. They're not worthless. They're represented in the public accounts. When the public accounts are published, the government is saying, we stand by these. These are a fair representation of the position of this department with respect to the citizens of Canada, right? I mean, there's a liability attached, I would think. Sorry, I'm starting to act like a lawyer, but what I'm getting at is that these aren't just my home budget notes or something like that. This is serious stuff, and they do take it seriously. So there's a legitimacy to these accounts that can't be dismissed. But at the same time, unquestionably, there are problems with the accounts. And I think I alluded to that earlier. The distinction between capital and revenue expenditures, what's appropriate in what's appropriate by way of an expenditure coming out of capital versus revenue, that continues to be an issue to today, I suspect. It certainly was in the 1990s, and it had been for at least 100 years. So when you say accounting problems, it's a very general phrase, right? And
Yes.
okay, what do we mean? With something like accounting, you have to drill down into the specifics. When you say accounting problems, do you mean that there's people who are fraudulently, taking money out of the accounts? And that certainly happened. There's a bunch of, Jarvis and Clench, and there's others there who were engaging in fraudulent behavior. Is that what you mean by accounting problems? Or do you mean that the categorization of things between accounts is not as rigorous as it should be? Those are two quite different things, I would think.
Well, I'm going to suggest that to you that not only was there outright thievery at times by some historical actors. Would you agree with that?
Outright thievery. There was theft from the accounts, correct? Yes.
But there was also not a standard form of accounting used by all the Indian agents, because it depended on who the Indian agent was to actually record the transactions, right?
There is always variability in accounting systems. I know simply because I've been responsible in other parts of my life for maintaining books of account for business, for nonprofit organizations. I've been responsible reviewing extensive transactions, and I know how the statements you see at the end of the day look very organized and clean. Behind that, things can often be very messy. In fact, they usually are to a degree. So the lack of consistency that you refer to, absolutely, that existed. It's an odd tension in Indian affairs because it's a very centralized bureaucracy that, instructions come from top down. But the agents at the same time still had a fair bit of autonomy, or could. And so you do see that variability, and for sure, and that larger suite of accounting records that constitute the trust fund account system that I talked about yesterday. That includes the records that the agents kept, and those would and could vary quite a bit. The records at headquarters tend to be a lot more consistent. It's easier to exercise control over a staff of clerks in an office in Ottawa than it is to exercise that same level of control over a number of Indian agents all spread all across the country. So
Would you agree that it might be consistently wrong as much as it might be consistently right? I mean, how do we know?
that's what an audit is about. That's right. I mean, but when the statements are published, they're sworn and signed off. That's
That's as good as we can get, that someone swore off on them?
that's how our system operates, is it not?
Perhaps we can go to page 84 of your report.
Okay.
And in page 84 of your report, for the period after 1902 to 1903, there's a new revenue amount for the Robinson Superior Treaty account of $93,181.82. Do you see that on page 84?
Oh, 84.
Yes.
Yes, now I see it.
So sorry. Where am I looking?
It's the bottom row.
Bottom row,
Okay.
July 1, 1902 to June 30th, 1903.
Thank you.
There's an entry there under revenue, new revenue of $93,181.82. Do you know where that came from?
That was the amount that was decided on as, sorry, that's the capitalized amount that was decided on by the Department of Indian Affairs as part of the settlement of the question of arrears of Robinson annuities. Yes, I'll just leave it at that. You'll have more.
We've heard from other witnesses in this case that an amount of $205,000 was identified as the capital amount needed at 3% to fund RHT augmented annuities into the future.
Yes, it was 205,000. That was for both Robinson Superior and Robinson Huron. And then that was at 4%, actually.
Oh, 4%. I apologize. Yes. But would you agree with me? It wasn't for RST at all. It was actually just for RHT.
Oh, was it? Yeah.
You
Okay.
don't know about that?
I can't recall. I've certainly read those documents, but I don't have it.
Okay, well, I'm going to suggest to you that the 205,000 at 4% was calculated only in respect of RHT, not
Okay.
RST.
If you say so.
If you just accept that, can you provide us or help the court with any explanation of how it came to be that a portion of that 205,000 came to be credited to RST?
Okay, so now I must confess I'm quite lost because I thought that the 205,000 was for both RHT and RST, and that there was a sum of I'd have to look at the. Can you give me a moment? What we'll do?
Well, let me try and help you.
Well,
If you go to page, let's see, 66,
yes,
and in the second column on page 66,
yeah,
the RHT has a new revenue amount of $111,818.18.
exactly.
And if you add that with the $93,181.82,
Mhm.
I spoke about on page 84, you get exactly
Exactly.
205,000.
Yes, and I can picture a memo from the accountant, DC Scott, that shows those numbers and then the 205,000. And what I'm picturing is that was for the two respective treaty areas. So I don't understand how it's all RHT.
All right, you don't have to understand it, but I'm wondering if you could explain why it's 93,000 and not 91,000 or 82,000. Do you have any idea that you can help the court with this? This is something that I don't have the answer to, and I was hoping you might be able to help the court.
I'm sorry, I'm still confused. So then there may be an error in my transcription here, but the two amounts in the amount that was credited to the Robinson Superior Treaty Nations in 1902-03, that amount plus the similar amount, I should give you the exact amount for the record, $93,181.82. So that amount plus the amount that corresponding entry for the Robinson Huron First Nation. So that's
$111,818.18 on page 66.
right. So
of your
that adds
report.
up to 205,000, does it not?
Yes.
So what is your question?
Do you know why it was divided up that way?
I have read those documents many, many times. I did not prepare for this case knowing that answer because I was not part of the work that I was doing here, but I've read through all the memos and in between the lawyers and Scott and so on, and there's a very complicated set of calculations that led to those two numbers at the end of the day. I couldn't tell you that.
That's fine. I was
Yeah.
hoping maybe you could.
Okay.
But those documents aren't before the court as part of your report.
No, not at all. No.
At paragraph 17 of your report, I'd like to ask you a couple questions about that.
Sure.
That's at page 12 of your report. I'll wait till you get there.
Thanks. Okay, I'm here.
You
I'm
there?
good. Yeah.
Okay, so at paragraph 17 of your report on page 12, you opine that the administration of the RST treaty in 1850 was carried out by local officials who were implementing the policies of the imperial government as directed by the representative in the colony, the governor general. That's your opinion.
Correct.
Can you tell me what were the policies of the imperial government in relation to the implementation of the Robinson treaties?
No, I can't specifically with the Robinson treaties. No.
So how do you know that the local officials were implementing policies of the imperial government?
So I may have misunderstood, but I'm saying that in general, local officials are carrying out policies of the imperial government. I didn't say policies of the imperial government with respect to the Robinson treaties, but just policies of the imperial government, broadly speaking.
Okay, but so with respect to the Robinson Superior treaties, we don't know what the policies of the imperial government are unless you can tell us.
No, I don't. No, I'm simply trying to capture there the chain of command, if you will.
The way it should have happened is what you're trying to convey.
No, not really. No, I wouldn't say that at all. No. Perhaps it's misleading if that's the case. I understand quite well that policies are made in the province of Canada, a lot of them, right? Or not policies, but decisions are made locally a lot of the time, but ultimately control rests with the imperial authorities. But there's a great deal of devolution over time, but the Governor General still has a much more significant role in this period than he or she would have today. So the Governor General is interpreting and carrying out instructions ultimately that come from the imperial authorities, but is making decisions locally to a significant extent, informed by local officials. What I've written there is a very brief. All I'm trying to do is spell out, like I said, the chain of command. I'm not trying to give a fulsome description of the way decision-making operated in the colony. That would be another report, and it's certainly not what my intention was here.
Okay, please understand that it's really important for, I think the judges, it is important for the plaintiffs to not only have your explanation in writing, but to make sure that what is in writing is what you mean to say. And chain of command is a very different thing than saying that they were policies that were implemented, because I want to know what the policies are.
Right, fair enough. I see your point. Okay.
And so can you help us? Where might we find those policies? Do you know?
Correspondence between the imperial officials and governors general. There's a great deal of it.
I haven't seen any policies from the imperial government with respect to the Robinson Superior Treaty that I found. Perhaps maybe you know of some?
So no, once again, I said I wasn't
Oh.
referring to policies that were specific to the Robinson treaties.
And similarly, when you say in paragraph 17, policies as directed by the Governor General, I'm not aware of any directions authored by the Governor General in respect of RST. Are you?
No, because I didn't look at that closely for this. No. So the heading to this section is responsibility for trust funds. So the main import of this section is to identify who the responsible parties are in terms of the management of trust funds. So if I have given the impression that I am commenting on the larger question of responsibility for negotiating the treaty.
No, I'm not. This is not where I
Oh.
was going at.
Okay,
I'm looking for, you see, part of what the judge has to do is try and make a decision about looking at the facts of 1850 and 1851 and 1852 and seeing what the facts were to make a decision. And relevant to the judge's job is if there were policies in place, she should know about it.
I see. Okay,
If there were directions from the Governor General, the court should know about it. And I'm just trying to see
Right,
if
right.
there are any.
very good. Okay, no, I thank you very much for that. I understand. And no, so as I've said, I was referring to policies in general. This is a very general statement. I'm not aware of any imperial direction that has anything to do with the Robinson treaties.
All right. And again, paragraph 18, I think in the same vein is a very general policy statement, I guess, about the management being taken over by the local government.
Sorry, I'm supposed to speak. I think we're getting quite a bit more specific in 18 than we are in paragraph 18 versus paragraph 17, but it's still a general statement, absolutely.
Okay, well, can you tell us, based as a historian and what you know about about the devolution that you speak about in 1860, how and when did the imperial crown signify that it was no longer exercising jurisdiction over Indian affairs? You see, the 1860 Act is an act of the local government.
Right, exactly. Yeah, no, that's a good question. Yeah, I'm trying to remember what came from the imperial government. I don't know.
Okay. At paragraph 47 of your report, well, maybe we can actually dovetail it with some other comments. Hold on. Sorry, I'm pausing because I have made a note on one of the lettered exhibits, which it turns out is different than exhibit GG, which is the three redlined versions.
I
I'm
tried
just
to
trying to
warn you.
locate. What?
I tried to warn you.
Let me see if I can just very quickly find. There we go. So exhibit, I guess GG is the drafts of your reports. Do you have those in front of you?
Do,
And can you go to page 82 of your draft report?
which one?
Is each tab separately?
Tab
shown?
one, sorry. I guess tab one of GG, the report that's dated revised draft June 8th, 2022. Or sometimes called April 18th to June 8th version.
Oh, okay. I don't have the red line version you have, but I just have this three
Oh, yeah,
separate.
sure. Maybe we should go both have the same one. Page 82.
Thank you. Wow.
Page 82 of the first tab, which is the first version.
I'm gonna turn on a light here. This one.
You with me?
I am, yes.
Okay, great. So page 82 has a heading that's lined through called discussion.
Yes,
And on the right-hand side, there's a fair number of comments from Thomas Lipton, who's the lawyer for Ontario, or one of
Correct.
the lawyers for Ontario.
correct.
If you go back on page 81, there's a reference to Thomas Lipton at LT 172. Now,
Okay.
the 172 refers to the 172nd comment that Thomas Lipton made on your report.
Okay.
You would agree with that?
Yes, yes, I would.
And what he wrote was perhaps state in a paragraph at the end about whether you have seen any stocks held on behalf of First Nations since 1861,
Mm-hmm,
other than the ones purchased before that date.
mm-hmm.
And you in effect actually do that in your next version of the report, right?
Right, yes, I do. I remember that. So we went through these comments literally one by one. And with each one, we then had a discussion. So with that, one, I recall, should we have a comment in there? And then we discussed, is it actually true? Am I able to say that? And I said, yes, I am. So that's why I put it in there.
All right, so that statement is true that you could not find any stocks held on behalf of First Nations since 1861, other than the ones purchased before that date.
Right, I couldn't find any that had been purchased or any investments that were made after that date. That's right. Yeah.
Now, the reason why 1861 is important is because that's when there was a change in policy, correct?
Yeah, the implicit reference there is to the January 16th, 1861 order in council.
Right, where there was a change in policy where the government took over the investment.
It's not a change in policy as I see it. It's a,
Okay.
yeah, it's something more official than that. I don't know what you would call it. But a policy isn't Yeah, it's like, it's a change in, I'm sorry, I really don't know what the technical term would be, but it's an order in council, so isn't not, it's law of some sort.
Okay, can we, without calling it anything, it's a change in how the government was going to operate? Is that fair?
Yeah, we can say that. Yeah.
Okay. Now, would you agree with me that the RST Anishinaabe were not consulted about that change? I haven't seen any consultation about
Yeah,
it.
I would say it's highly unlikely, but not impossible, but highly unlikely.
Can we turn to page 34 of your report, please?
Okay.
This is under the heading of scope of authority in managing monies in their trust fund accounts.
Right, I see it.
And did you actually mean to say in their trust fund accounts or in the trust fund accounts managed by the government?
No, that's a perfectly good point.
Well, I'm asking, I don't
So-
know.
I just haven't finished. So that is a perfectly good point. And I was being somewhat sloppy there in that wording because yes, it should actually be scope of authority in managing monies in the trust fund accounts held on their behalf by the Crown.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that is in respect of the band specific accounts, is that true?
No, that's in respect of all of the trust fund accounts.
Okay. Now at paragraph 86, sorry, paragraph 74, excuse me. I can't read my own handwriting. That's at paragraph 75 of your report.
Okay,
You talk about and I'm paraphrasing, and I hope you will agree that up until 1884, the legislation is silent about the role that the First Nations have in spending monies held in trust for the
Mhm.
band.
exactly. That's why I highlighted this, because this is the first instance that I came across, at least, that where there is a role or input from First Nations in the management. Exactly.
And just because the legislation is silent, you would agree with me that the reality of the matter is not the same. And it's that the Indian agents and the government officials were at times consulting with Indians about the use of trust funds held by the Crown on their behalf. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And at times, the band's consent was sought.
Yes, and there was an understanding in some periods where it was a requirement of, it was understood as a requirement that you had to check with the band. I'm thinking of some instances in the late 1830s and 1840s. I can picture the correspondence where it said, with the approval of the chief, we'll see that this expenditure happens, that sort of thing. So it wasn't just that we should consult with, or it wasn't just discretionary. It seemed to be, the department officials seemed to treat it as a requirement.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
And a requirement in what period?
So this was pre-1850.
And how about after 1850?
I'm afraid I don't know.
You don't know.
No.
Sorry, I missed something here about the dates. Pre-1850, what's going on? There isn't a requirement for consultation?
I think what the
Yes.
witness was saying was that prior to 1850, he recalls instances of it being required to secure the consent of the First Nations to
Right.
the expenditure of monies.
Correct.
But he doesn't have an answer for post 1850 as whether that was a legal requirement. Is that fair?
That's fair. Yes, that's correct.
But legal requirements aside, you made the point earlier that the way things actually operated on the ground were different than what the law actually stated.
Yes, that's right.
And so just because the legislation was silent prior to 1884, it does not mean that on the ground there wasn't consultation going on.
Agreed.
And it doesn't mean that band consent wasn't sought from time to time.
Agreed.
And it doesn't mean that First Nations weren't providing input on how to spend their money from time to time.
Agreed.
Let's move to this idea of Indian monies for a moment. Now, would you agree with me, and here I'm referring to paragraph 83 of your report, I've got a note to myself that it's only in 1906 that the phrase Indian monies first appears.
No.
No, I got that wrong?
I think it's much earlier, but I could be wrong. Just give me a moment. Oh, so you, the two words together like that, so
Yes.
not just money. Yeah, okay, I'll accept that then, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if you look at paragraph 83, it's a new section on how capital monies may be expended,
Mhm.
and it requires the consent of the band in paragraph 90 of the new section.
Yes, I remember that.
Now, this requirement for consent of the band, would you agree with me that that is not a change in practice, the way things were actually working on the ground? Or do you not know?
Well, I guess my only quibble with that would be that practice varied, whereas this is a requirement, so the two aren't equivalent, but it's codifying. So here, it's not codifying something that was consistently the practice, but it's codifying something that definitely the department believed should be the practice and was at times.
Yes, and that's spending money with the consent of the band.
Yeah, it was seen as an important change to the act.
I guess confirming of the good practices that some of the Indian agents were engaging in it earlier, correct?
Right, you could say that, yes.
Now, at paragraph 86 of your report, and again, here I am paraphrasing from what I understand to be your opinion, that it was only in 1914 that authority was given to cabinet to spend capital money without the consent of the band. Would you agree with that?
So it's not that it's only in 19. Oh, I see what you mean. Okay, so I looked at this one a little bit differently. This is, from my perspective, this is part of the more aggressive policy of the department in this era, where they're trying to exert more control over the bands. And so they bring in this change so that, because what's going on is that there's a lot of valuable First Nations land out on the prairies in particular, and they want to be able to free that up for other purposes quite often. And they're finding that the department wants to be able to exercise a bit more discretion with band capital monies in some cases, and they're trying to drive First Nation communities in certain directions. And this is a heavy-handed change to the, in my view, a change to the legislation that allows the department to do that. So I think that's the context. It's, yes, I'll leave it at that.
Would you agree with me that as per your paragraph 88 on page 39, in 1924, sorry, 1926, excuse me, the authority to spend without the consent of the band was up to $2,000?
This is out of, no, that's not, no, that's different. It's that it gives the governor and council authority. So gives the governor and council authority to authorize any expenditure deemed worthwhile if the capital of the band didn't exceed 2,000. So yes, sorry.
Yes,
I guess-
I'm sorry, I didn't phrase it well and you
Yeah.
did.
Yeah, but yes, that's, and again, this is part of that increased paternalism, the tightening of control that's taking place in this time period.
Can I get how you phrased it again?
This, the last sentence, it's part
Yeah.
of the increased paternalism, the
No,
tightening
the
of
the
control.
sentence before that, when when Mr. Schachter said you said it better than
Ah,
I.
okay, I just read from the,
Legislation in 1926 added a proviso to section 89 sub 2,
Right,
giving the governor and council authority to authorize any expenditure deemed worthwhile if the capital of the band didn't exceed $2,000.
if, thank you.
Is that correct?
yes, that's correct.
So what would happen if the capital of the band exceeded $2,000?
Mhm. They would have to get consent from the band.
Yes.
So can we say up to $2,000?
That's the way I put it, but
Okay,
the
the
witness sort of
correction was,
corrected me quite technically, and now we're back to my paraphrase.
but after $2,000, they still require consent
Yes.
Correct.
for expenditures up to,
Out of the capital account.
right? Thank you.
No, well, the expenditure, it's not only expenditures up to 2,000, it's whether the capital in the account was 2,000. That's the point.
Yeah, that's the point. Yeah.
If you had,
If you don't have a lot of money in your capital account, they can spend, the government can spend it on whatever it so chooses. If
right,
you've got a lot of money in the capital account, then they have to go ask permission or get consent of the band.
so let's take one band, let's call it the Seven Nations, that might have $150,000 in its capital account, as opposed to another RST band, a different RST band that might have $10 in its account. Even though there might only be a $5 expenditure needed or desired, in one, the Seven Nations fictitious band, you'd have to ask their permission. But for the band that only had $10 in its capital account, you could just do what you wanted.
Mhm. That's how it reads.
Well, are you aware that that's how it worked as well?
I haven't seen that particular piece carried out. No, I can't think. Some of these clauses that I've relayed here, I've definitely seen examples of them being used. That one in particular, I haven't seen that.
In your study of the account of the Indian Act, do you have an explanation as to why that was the case?
I'd have to go back to the Hansard most likely. So-
Nothing you can help the court with
No,
today?
no, that's correct.
So is it fair to, to sum up, you don't recall seeing this provision implemented?
No, I haven't seen that provision implemented.
Thank you.
This would be an excellent time.
Right answer. Let's take a break.
I probably have about half an hour left.
Has Mr. Mr. Gover, you still on 35 minutes?
I do, thank you.
Excellent.
All right.
15 minutes. Thank you.
For recess for 15 minutes. Well, I was in, you may be seated.
Mr. Angel, I wonder if you could go to Exhibit GG and go to page 8 of your first draft, April 18 to June 18. I'll wait for you to get to page 8.
Yeah, sorry, I just. Okay, I'm there.
So you will see that there is some blue highlighting in a chart. And below that, you have at page 8, in the first draft, the following. For the purposes of organizing and constraining my analysis, I identified the following 4 questions. Now, earlier in your testimony, you talked about an iterative approach to the questioning and instructions that you received. And I have a couple questions about this phraseology. First of all, why are you constraining your analysis?
Mhm. Because I have a tendency to write about, I find history very interesting, and I have a tendency to go off on tangents. And so I have to be very conscious of sticking to the questions that the core questions that I'm being asked to answer. And so I guess it was really more a reflection of my own personality, a recognition of that. Correct. Yes, that's what it's about.
And you identify, or you write that you identified 4 questions.
Right.
So was it you that identified these questions, or was it instructions from your counsel?
Sure. No, that's a perfectly fair question. And the wording isn't the best because the questions as such were identified in that iterative process. What I did there, what I personally did there is I wrote those, I produced that wording. And I sent it to Council for Ontario and said, does this capture what I am being asked to do? So I took it upon myself to draft these, but the process of identifying the actual questions as such, that was definitely coming first and foremost from Council, my interpretation of it, and then that iterative process I've mentioned.
So what we see then in the draft is the questions that council thought should be asked.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yes. So I send this to Council and I say, is this what I should be addressing? Is this a good written description of the questions that you're asking me to answer?
Well, let's go to the second draft,
Sure.
June 8th to June 21, 2022. And if you go to page 9, we see a different verbiage used and different an additional question. So at paragraph number 3 on page 9, you wrote, for the purposes of organizing and constraining my analysis, and instead of you identifying it, you now have the words, council asked me to answer the following 4 questions, but then you list 5 questions.
Mhm.
You have to answer yes or no for the record.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. And question 5 was, if augmented annuities were owed under the Robinson treaties and had been timely paid, based on existing historical evidence, how would those amounts likely have been handled within the Indian Trust Fund account system? You thought that was an important question to have answered?
No, I did not. That question was provided by Council.
So council wanted you to answer that.
Correct. So I left this as yes, those 2 blue text additions there, those both came from Council. I didn't change anything. After that first draft after the first draft of the questions in the April 18th draft, any changes that you see in these questions came from Council.
How about any other changes in the report in blue? Did they come from council too?
No, I made those other changes, but the changes, we're only talking about the questions here.
Okay,
Sorry, you finished up by saying any changes to the questions after that first block of 4 that we saw in tab 1 come from council.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
now going back to the first draft. If you go over to page 25 of your first draft, what eventually became question number 5 is actually in the discussion portion.
I'm going to go back to question 5 in the second draft and look at that and think for myself whether what I can agree or not with what you say.
Okay.
It's perfectly reasonable of you to make that connection. But I'm being quite honest here. I don't remember that question 5. I don't remember a linkage between them. And I'm being
All right,
perfectly
well,
honest.
let's take a look at page 28 and what your opinion was in respect of what would have likely happened, if we can call it that.
Sure.
So at page 28 of the first tab of the April 18th to June 18th version, the last paragraph on page 28, you wrote, "In conclusion, my view is that the most likely scenario, based solely on the documented practice of Indian Affairs officials, is that any increased annuities would have been distributed through the 2 treaty-wide trust fund accounts as part of the regular annuity payments." See that there?
I do.
And that was your opinion that you had based on your expertise at the time?
It was, although I don't like the way I've written it there because it should be, if the amounts were low enough, and I do go on to qualify that if they were greater than $10 a head, then I think something different would have happened, and that's still my opinion. I think if the amounts were quite small, they would have gone through the regular annuity payment system, but anything over some threshold, and I identified $10 a head because that was the amount that Shingle Combs suggested. So it seemed to me like a reasonable kind of threshold. Anything above that, I think would have been handled differently.
Well, first of all, your opinion at the time was not $10 a head, it was $10 to $40 a head. If you look at page 27, and in the middle of the page under scenario number 2, and the second last paragraph, last sentence, the reason this scenario might come about is that there would be a reluctance on the part of government officials, and very likely some band members and band officials as well, to see such large sums of money distributed in full in each year. By large, I am suggesting anything an order of magnitude greater than the typical distributions and annuity payments at the time. So somewhere between $10 and $40 a head.
Yes, and I remember where, so that comes from an order of magnitude $1 to $4. So 10 times 1, 10 times 4. So an order of magnitude greater than the payment says they were existed. I see, you know where I went wrong here. Okay, so my original range was $10 to $40, and that was based on the treaty terms of, so a range, other treaties out there too were around, started at least at $1, and then $4 was in the treaty as an augmented amount. Shingle Combs asked for 10. What I forgot to do is I should have multiplied that by 10 as well. So my threshold should have been $100. And as the cutoff. Yeah, no, that's where that's coming
But,
from.
you know, you're assuming, I think in your analysis here, that the money couldn't be paid out to the collectivity, to the band itself. Why are you assuming that it's either going to individuals or being left with the government? It could be
Right.
just paid out to the band.
Right. Okay. So do you mean, so each year then the Crown would have just turned over the money rather than managing it through the Indian Trust accounts
Well,
system?
If they're going to pay the annuity, they have to pay the annuity.
Right.
And if if there was concern about individuals getting it, and let me suppose to you or ask you to assume.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you to assume that part of the treaty had a stipulation that limited the amount that individuals could get to $4 per year.
Mhm.
I'm going to ask you to assume that.
Sure, that's fine.
And that doesn't mean that the collectivity can't get the balance of the annuity. You understand?
No, of course, that makes sense, yeah.
You didn't think about that possibility, did you?
No, because that wouldn't, and I'll explain why. I did think about it, but I was trying to stay consistent with the practice of the department. So if you want to be consistent, my understanding of how nations would have preferred to see this money would have involved a sum that goes to the collective. Absolutely. That would be the Anishinaabe perspective on it. But I was trying to model, and this is why I just like doing this counterfactual stuff, because it involves a lot of, you have to pretend that things were different than they were. And I don't understand the basis for that. But if I was trying to model this as in terms of the Crown's actions, not in terms of the First Nations expectations. And perhaps I was mistaken in doing that, but that was the template I was using. So from my perspective, the Crown wouldn't have treated this as a collective amount. But I quite agree with you. That would be quite a plausible scenario. Here's how I was thinking about this a whole bunch on my walk earlier, because if we assume that the Crown and the nations had entered into substantive discussions, a more fulsome engagement around what was going to happen to these revenues, then you would have had something different than the band trust account system. So it's not a very good guide for what would have happened. So if you speculate that things were different because, okay, I'll back up even one step further. If you speculate that both emanations of the Crown, the province, and this is after 1867, but it would apply to province of Canada as well. If you speculate that the Crown recognized that they had an obligation under the treaty. I'm not saying there was, I'm just saying if they recognized that they had an obligation under the treaty to share in the resource revenues, if they could do so, that would have been a very different Crown than actually historically existed, right? That's not what the Crown behaved like. That was not the mentality. That was not what we deal with actually. So if they were like that, something else has to change too. To me, if you had a Crown like that, I'm going to call it in my 21st century ahistorical way, a more enlightened Crown, then they're also going to speak to the First Nations. They're going to treat them more as partners. They're not going to deal with them as wards. It's not going to be so paternalistic. They're going to enter into discussions with them and say, how are we going to share in the benefits of this together? And then they'll come up with something. But that's not what happened. And as soon as I start going that road, I have to change a whole bunch of other things too. And then we're in a totally different world from what existed. But my answer to the question, if you want me to speculate, because I gave a bunch of thought, because now that my scenarios are out in the open, I might as well, be prepared to address them fully and on the record. If you had a Crown that recognized an obligation to share in increased revenues, then it would be a Crown that would negotiate and make decisions with First Nations.
Now, I note that at page 28, you had opined that if the sums involved were considerable, then greater than $10 a head, it is possible, and perhaps that should have been $100 a head. It is possible that the First Nations involved would have sought agreement from government officials to invest. I'm going to stop there.
Okay.
Because the word changes later in your next version. Instead of invest, it becomes leave money in the account. Who suggested that change?
Oh, that would have come from me. All these changes in here, it's coming from me. But let me think through the implications of that so I can reconstruct my thinking around that. So invest is a more active kind of active action. It implies more agency. And I think by the time I got to the second draft, I'd become more what's the word for it? Insistent on the limited scope that First Nations had and more insistent on the control exercised by the Crown. So it seemed to me that the way I was conceptualizing it is that the options were narrowing. So instead of being able to invest, their option would have been to leave those monies in there to attract interest. But I think that's the reasoning process I went through.
But you wouldn't disagree that in this counterfactual world where people were cooperating, there could be investments outside of the band trust account.
Oh, yeah. So what I just described to you in my previous answer about this world where people are cooperating, that's my thinking right now, past what I've put into these scenarios. Once I decided to get rid of the scenarios in here, I didn't give it any further thought until yesterday.
Okay, thank you. Just a couple more questions. Can we go to the third draft? And the third draft at page 5, under introduction. In the first draft, you identified questions. In the second draft, council asked you some questions. And in the third draft, you were instructed by council to answer questions.
Mhm.
Now, again, do I take it that it's your lawyers that, or not your lawyers, Ontario lawyers that drafted these questions?
I don't know what the proper interpretation is of the process we went through. I can only describe for you what we did, which is that together we identified the wording that best captured what they were asking me to do.
Well, but the earlier version asked you to opine on the counterfactual world, if we can call it that.
Okay, right,
But that didn't make it into your final report, correct?
right.
And it didn't make it into your final report because Ontario's lawyer said, we don't want you to answer that question.
No, I said I don't feel very comfortable with it, and we agreed that we wouldn't have it in there, that it wouldn't be in there because I was not comfortable.
One of the questions you were not asked to answer was whether the annuity monies were Indian monies as defined under the Indian Act.
No, I was never asked that, and I don't recall it ever coming up. I don't think I'm qualified to answer that.
Okay, well, we can just live with that answer that you're not qualified to answer that question. And I have no further questions.
Just for the video, Mr. Angel, can you move the lamp a little bit, swing it back? It's blocking your head.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Professor Bodway had an entire day where he looked like a talking.
Mr. Angel. My name is Brian Gover, and I'm counsel for what are referred to as the group of 7. There's 7 added party plaintiffs in this litigation, and I have some questions for you over the next, and you've heard it, 35 minutes or so. So with that, am I correct, sir, that your report only analyzes the period 1850 through 1909?
That's correct.
And that's a period of 59 years, is that right?
Yes, it is.
And you restricted your analysis to those years because those are the only years for which you had access to the Indian Trust Fund ledgers. Is that right?
That's right.
Those were the only years for which the Indian Trust Fund ledgers were publicly available through Library and Archives Canada.
Correct.
And the archived Indian Trust ledgers were only available up to, and it's the final year is the 1908-1909 fiscal year.
That's
Is that right?
That's right.
you did not have access to any records for later years for the purposes of your analysis.
No, I did not.
So you did not analyze the latter period, 1909 to 2019, 110 years. Is that
No, I
right?
did not.
And sir, you do not express any opinions on the administration of the Robinson Superior Treaty Funds post 1909, do you?
That's correct.
Now, for treaty-wide annuity accounts, I understand that the vast majority of the funds flowing out went to distributions to individual beneficiaries. Is that right?
The treaty annuities?
Yes.
Yes, they went to individuals.
And for the RST, the annuity money was always paid directly to individual annuitants. Is that right?
As far as I interpret the trust accounts and my recollection of the pay lists, yes.
Your review did not determine what happened to this money once it was in the hands of the band members, did it?
That's correct.
That's correct, it did not. Is that right?
It didn't, it did not.
Thank
include
you.
that.
The records you reviewed simply did not show that. Is that fair?
Yes, that's true.
You did not examine records of what band members did with the annuity money once they received it. Fair?
No, I did not.
Now, you're not aware of any restrictions on what band members could do with the money once it was in their hands, are you?
No, I am not. I don't think I'm not aware of any restrictions on that. No.
And in particular, you're not aware of any legislative restrictions?
No legislative restrictions? No.
You're not aware of any policy restrictions?
I'm trying to think of one. There's one category of behavior where I'm just wondering. I don't think it was a restriction. I think it was the Department of Indian Affairs for a period of time encouraged minors to place their annuities in savings, but it wasn't a requirement. It was just an encouragement. They were just trying to inculcate good habits. So it wasn't a restriction. No.
Right, thank you. So far as you're aware then, subject to what you just said about the encouragement, the individual annuitants could do whatever they pleased with the money.
Yes.
If they so chose, they could invest it as they saw fit, correct?
Yes.
And you're not aware of any restrictions preventing them from doing that, investing the money as they saw fit.
No, I'm not.
Now, in the interest sub-accounts of specific bands, some payments were made for a variety of expenses incurred by the bands. Is that right?
That's right.
And I'll ask Ms. Lewis, my friend for Red Rock and White Sand, to exhibit, if she would please, exhibit 87, that's your report, paragraph 50, and really this takes us to table 5. So in your report, you provide an example at paragraph 50 from the trust fund account of the Batchewana First Nation. We've touched on that already. Is that correct, sir?
Yes.
And this is meant to show an example of the types of revenue and expenditures in the interest sub-accounts. Is that right?
That's right.
And one type of expenditure that we see in your table 5 for Batchewana's expenditures is for professional services. And we see
Yes.
that
Yes, I see that.
professional services, example given, legal advice, timber inspections, land valuation. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And we've seen then legal advice.
Could I just get to that, please?
Yes, I'm sorry, Your Honor.
Page 27.
Page
Yes.
27 of the report.
of the
It is,
report.
Your Honor. Thank you. That's exhibit 87, page 87, the report.
Page 20. I'm going with page 20. Thank you very much. Go ahead.
Thank you. You'll see the reference there to legal advice, and we've already discussed that to some extent, Mr. Angel, correct? You and I, a moment ago, before Her
Oh, I
Honor
see. Yes,
asked for assistance,
yes,
you see that. So we know that the bands were spending their money on professional services,
they were.
and these services apparently included professional advice from advisors.
That's correct.
And in this instance, one form of the professional advice was legal advice. Is that fair?
That's true. Yes.
Now, one observation that you make is that you did not see any records of individual band members depositing their annuity money or annuity payments into band-specific accounts. Is that right?
Right. Yes.
And the reference, Your Honor, is to the report, Exhibit 87, paragraph 54.
Thank you.
And you already mentioned that for the Robinson Superior Treaty, payments were always made to individuals.
Correct.
There was
By
never a,
payments, are you payments of annuities?
yes,
Thank you.
thank you, Your Honor. And let me clarify that with the witness, payments of annuities, and your answer is still correct, I take it, sir?
Correct. Yes.
All right. There was never a collective annuity that was paid to the bands themselves.
I'm not aware of that. What about the initial treaty payment? I'm just remembering back the sessional papers where you see the payments, and there's the pay list for all of the Robinson Huron nations. But I thought the payment to the Robinson Superior, wasn't it just a lump sum that went to all of the
So
Robinson?
there's a term called gifts, you may know as an historian who's looked at this, the gifts,
Yeah.
but they stand different, in a different category from
Okay.
something received a year later, which would be the collective annuity.
Oh, I see. So that initial payment isn't considered an annuity, because the treaty signing. Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
Does that accord with your understanding?
Yeah, no,
sir?
that makes sense. Then I understand.
Thank you. Now, the individual payments during this period started out at around $1.60 per person.
Right.
Is that right?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
And that would have fluctuated with changes to the band's population,
Yes, it did.
and therefore tended to be actually less than $1.60 per person.
Mhm.
Is that a yes for the record? sir?
Sorry, yes,
And then after 1875, the payments were $4 per person. Am I correct?
correct.
And Mr. Angel, you would not classify these as substantial payments, would you?
No, I wouldn't.
We're not talking about a large amount of money.
It's considerably more than it is today, but I'm not an economist, but no, I know that for the economy of the time, $4 is not trivial, but it's not a year's wages either.
And that takes me to my next questions. In fact, you would not comfortably live on $1.60 per year in 1850, would you?
No,
You know that as an
I
historian.
do.
You would not comfortably live on $4 per year in 1875, would you?
No, you wouldn't.
And again, sir, you know that as an historian. Is
I
that
do.
fair?
Yes,
And you cannot say whether if substantial collective annuity payments were made to the bands, that the money would have been placed initially into band-specific accounts, and then the bands would have withdrawn from it. You simply don't know what would have happened.
that's
sir.
correct.
You cannot say if they then would have earned the band trust account rate while the money was in the band specific accounts, can you?
Are you extending this last one from the previous question?
Yes.
So given that I can't say the previous one, that's correct.
And that's the logic of it, isn't it?
Yeah,
You can't say how revenues for sales of property or timber or minerals on the reserves were placed in band specific accounts and that they would have earned interest on the band trust account rates, would you? Could
Sorry,
you?
you just referred to reserve lands that generated revenue. Did you not?
I did. My question was, you cannot say how revenues for sales of property, timber, or minerals on reserves were placed in band specific accounts and earned interest at the band trust account rates.
No, that is what I can say. Like I can say that that is what happened. And so that's the practice that I'm describing here.
But coming back to the absence of a collective annuity,
Right.
we're left with this. You can't tell us what would have happened, whether income or whether the band trust account rates would have applied.
I'm sorry, I'm struggling to understand the question now.
Well, I've already put it in a way. You've told us that you cannot say that collective annuity payments would have earned the band trust account rates while the money was in the band specific accounts.
That's right. Hypothetical collective treaty annuity payments, I cannot say what would have happened to them.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you. Perhaps I'll take you then to the next area, and it is this. As you describe in your report, the band trust accounts were not actual bank accounts, were they?
That's correct.
A band trust account was a bookkeeping device.
Correct.
It was just really an accounting mechanism. Is that fair?
I think I've used that phraseology as well, yes.
And in fact, you told Mr. Schachter, all these accounts are notional to some degree.
I did.
Now, when capitalization occurred for the annuities, that capital was not actually set aside in a specific bank account anywhere for the purpose of the annuities, was it?
No, it's recording a liability of the Dominion of Canada.
Right. And really, it was just the government agreeing to or deciding to pay a particular rate of interest on some amount of money and say that that was for the annuities.
Correct.
And this interest on the capitalization that is being used to pay the annuities is really just coming out of the Consolidated Revenue Fund.
Yes, I think I said earlier that at its heart, these records capture the numerical or quantitative details of obligations that exist between parties here. So the 40,000 is a way of saying we're going to pay 5% interest on this every year, and that means you get $2,000 a year. That's what it's doing. It's a way of crystallizing that obligation in an accounting record.
Thank you. Now, both before and after the annuities were capitalized, at the end of the day, the money was always coming out of the Consolidated Revenue Fund.
Yes,
It was just a matter of how the government did its own accounting. Is that fair?
yes.
I would like to take you to a particular thing with Ms. Lewis's help, and that is we're back to your report, Exhibit 87, and to page 82. And this is part of exhibit, pardon me, table D2. And in particular, what I'm interested in is an entry, and by the way, the table itself, for the record, details Robinson Superior Treaty-wide Annuity Account, Summary of Account Activity, 1851 to 1909. We see that at page 70, the beginning of table D2. And what I'm interested in on page 82 is the date range July 1, 1897 to June 30, 1898. And your notation in the interest column on the far right, and your footnote number 163. And
Sorry, I'm looking at, oh, it's page 82.
yes, it's page 82, Your Honor, and it's the
Footnote.
entry for July 1st, 1897 to June 30th,
Thank you.
1898, and in the right-hand column. And what we see for that fiscal year is that the Robinson Superior Treaty-wide account is charged negative interest. It's charged interest of 5% on the opening deficit balance in the interest sub-account. Is that correct?
Yes, just give me a moment because this was a very strange transaction and I want to refresh my memory so that I
Of-
can,
Of course, it's your evidence, Mr. Angel, so take your
okay.
time. All
Okay,
right,
yeah, I remember it now. Yep.
right, so in that year, the Robinson Superior Treaty-wide account was charged 5% interest on the opening deficit balance in the interest sub-account.
That's right.
We see that in the right-hand column. And at the time, the current band trust account rate was 3.5%. Is that
Yes,
right?
yes, it was.
But the 5% we see in the right-hand column there, interest, that was charged as an expense. Is that right?
That's right.
And in footnote 163, you say it is not clear why 5% interest was charged on the deficit amount rather than the then current rate of 3.5%.
Correct.
So the band was charged 5% interest on the negative amount, but it would have only earned 3.5% on any positive amounts.
Exactly. It makes no sense to me.
Do you agree with me that apart from making no sense, that doesn't appear to be particularly fair to the First Nation?
Absolutely. That was my thought when I saw the transaction.
Turning now to a general area about accounts charged for expenses. And here are really some expense items that appear to have been charged to the treaty-wide annuity interest accounts. And I'll take you back with Ms. Lewis's assistance to table D2. And for 1875 to 1878, the,
Sorry, where?
and this
what
is
page?
page 72 of the report, it's table D2. And we're within exhibit 87.
Thank you.
Thank you. And it's an entry for 1875 to 1878 for the Robinson Superior Treaty interest account. We see it was charged for food and other expenses incurred by Indian agents in payment of treaty annuities totaling $170.50.
Yes, I see that.
So these were incidental expenses incurred by the Indian agents in arranging for the payment of the annuities to the Anishinaabe.
Correct.
And this amount was charged to the Robinson Superior Treaty annuity account. Is that right?
It was. The question that I don't have an answer to is whether this was over and above the full value of the annuities or somehow reduced the amount of annuity. I can't tell from the records I've got.
And that's because of the nature of the records, which you discussed with my friend, Mr. Schachter, the adequacy or inadequacy of the records. Is that fair?
Well, no, it's these particular records aren't meant to provide that level of detail, but we would have to look at the pay lists in conjunction with these trust account records to be able to tell. So what I'm suggesting here is two possibilities come to mind. One is that all of the annuitants receive the full value of, so $4 a head. And on top of that, the parliamentary appropriation actually reimbursed the account for the value of those expenses. Or the other possibility is that those expenses came out of the appropriation and people got a reduced amount. And both are certainly possible because there are instances I've seen, for instance, in the 1850s, the Robinson Huron Treaty expenses were charged and came out of the annuity amount, and then so less was paid out. So it did happen. But here, my hunch is that that they did still get the full value of the annuities, because that's how the top up functioned. The top up was, there was an estimate made prior to how many people would need annuities. And so Parliament approved an amount that was estimated to be enough. And then if it wasn't, then they would fix it in the following year. Or they might have a bit of a surplus if it proved to be more than they needed. So I don't think that they reduced the amount that the annuitants got. I think this would have been covered by government, but at the same time, that surprises me because the government is very miserly in its handling of these funds. So I don't have an answer to it, but that's my reasoning about it.
That's my question, really. You simply don't know, do you?
No, you're absolutely right. I didn't need to go on about all
This
that.
was
I
at
don't
a,
know.
and I promised to be 35 minutes, but it's your evidence, sir.
Nope.
This was at a time when government policy, as you've described it, involved attempts to defray expenses. Is that right?
Yes,
And certainly the second alternative that you mentioned, that this would have come out of the allocation for the annuities, that would have meant the Anishinaabe were paying that expense.
that's
correct?
right.
And perhaps we can quickly deal with this in view of your evidence so far, but if we look at page 73, for example, we see expense for paying annuities. You see that, sir, for the period 1879 to 1880?
I do, and I believe yesterday I mentioned that sometime in the 1870s, the account starts showing all these expenses for paying annuities. And unfortunately, I don't know whether or not they were charged, whether they were borne by the Anishinaabe in the form of reduced annuities or covered by government. But yes, it happens for a fair while. And it's odd. Well, okay, I'm saying it's odd, but is it really fair to call it odd? Because these are somewhat unique accounts. This practice of paying for all sorts of expenditures out of an annuity account is perfectly normal for band-specific annuity accounts. What I hadn't seen before was for a treaty-wide annuity account to be levied with all these charges. That to me was unusual.
And when
But,
we talk
sorry,
about,
But
pardon
But
me,
you have said, I thought a number of times, we don't see any other treaty-wide annuity accounts.
Right, so that's why I'm questioning whether unusual.
So how could
is-
it be
Exactly, no,
unusual?
exactly. That's what occurred to me is I
Okay,
can't fairly characterize it that way.
all right.
Yep.
Thanks.
thank you. And just before we leave that area, with your evidence in mind, perhaps we could go to page 75. This for the period July 1st, 1884 to June 30th, 1885. Again, we see expenses for paying annuities. And we see it in the next entry, also on page 75 for July 1st, 1885 to June 30th, 1886, expenses for paying annuities. And in fact, we see the same entries on pages 76, 77, 78, 79. Well, let's leave it at 79 for now, but expenses for paying annuities. Is that correct, sir?
Yes, it is.
It's a regular entry that appears almost every year up until 1909.
It does. I just checked and you're quite right. It does.
And that's the last year for which you had records,
Right.
1909. Is that right?
Yes.
Now, sir, you've told us that the First Nations themselves did not have much control, if any, over the trust accounts that were for their benefit. Is that right? Certainly during the period that you were analyzing.
They had, yeah, they did not have any control as such. They had input into them.
In fact, you note that it was not until 1951, over 100 years after the Robinson Superior Treaty was negotiated, that any provision was made for some First Nation management over their trust funds in the Indian Act.
That's right.
And even then, it was only in the revenue accounts,
Correct.
correct? Not the capital account.
Correct.
The First Nations still had virtually no control over the funds in the capital account at that time. Fair?
That's right.
And you're right that from 1860 to 1970, Crown officials had legislative authority to exercise extremely close control over the management of Indian monies. Is that right, sir?
Yes, I do write that.
And Your Honor, the reference is Exhibit 87, the report at paragraph 94.
Thank you.
This was money purportedly being held for the benefit of the First Nations. Is that right?
Yes,
But the First Nations had only limited control over its management and use.
correct.
And this extremely close control exercised by government extended all the way to 1970.
Oh, it continued past that, but I only looked at the legislation up to 1970.
Now, one level of this extremely close control that the Crown officials could exercise over Indian monies was the ability to spend the band's capital without the band's consent.
That's correct.
And that power was expressly included in the Indian Act in 1914.
Correct.
And so if the government determined that it wanted to spend some of the money in a band's capital account, the government did not need the band's consent to do so.
At that time, I can't recall when it became a requirement to have BCRs, but approving expenditures. But yes, at that time, that's correct.
In fact, the government,
Sorry, did you say BCRs?
Oh, sorry, BCR, a band council resolution. Yes,
thank you. Thank you. And now I'll start. In fact, the government could spend money without even informing the band.
I suppose that must have been true. Yes,
It could spend money over the band's objections.
it could do that. Yes, definitely.
The government got to decide what it thought was in the best interests of the band in terms of spending the band's money.
Yes, that's correct.
And as you put it this morning, the Crown had the final say. Is that
Yes,
correct? Now, in your report at paragraph 76, you say that the governor and council could direct expenditures of funds for a number of purposes, and we see this carried through the legislation over decades. For the construction or repair of roads, bridges, ditches, and water courses, and such reserves or lands by way of contribution to schools frequented by such Indians. Is that correct, sir?
yes,
And we see it now on the screen. That's paragraph 76 of Exhibit 87. And that was at a time when officials from the Indian branch, or the Department of Indian Affairs, as it later became known, were adhering to the policy of defraying expenses, as you've told us. Is that right?
yes. That's 1906 there? That last amendment?
Paragraph 76. Well, that was actually the 1886 version, but we see it in 1898. We see that in paragraph 77,
Okay,
and the 1906 version is referenced at paragraph 80 of
oh,
your
okay.
report, Exhibit 87 at page 38.
Okay, but yes, there's still, there's, taking opportunities to charge expenses to band trust accounts that might otherwise have to be borne by government.
Right.
They're doing that at that time, yes.
In contemporary terms, they were pursuing a user pay approach.
Sure.
And one area that was specifically stated was the spending by way of contribution to schools frequented by such Indians.
Okay,
Well, is that right, sir? I
I
just
see
took
it.
you to it.
I see it, yes.
And that was a reference to Indian residential schools?
I would take it that way. That's certainly how I interpreted it.
And to Indian day schools. Is that right, sir?
Correct. That's how I interpreted it.
So the Crown could direct the spending of the money in the band's own trust accounts, money that was being held for the band's benefit, to pay for Indian residential schools and Indian day schools for the band's children. Is that right?
Absolutely. That goes back to at least the 1840s, if not earlier. I'm pretty sure it's earlier. So that was one of the centerpieces of the Indian policy, for sure.
And that Indian policy involved the bands themselves paying for the part of the cost of establishing and maintaining Indian residential schools.
Yes, that's correct.
And as an historian, you recognize that that's something that in June 2008, Prime Minister Harper said, the government of Canada sincerely apologizes and asks for the forgiveness of the Aboriginal peoples of this country for failing them so profoundly.
Yes, I remember that very well.
Thank you very much, sir. Those are my questions.
I would like to commend Mr. Gover for finishing in fewer than 35 minutes. I have no re-examination questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Angel. One of my favorite parts of the trial. I would like to thank you on behalf of the court and behalf of everyone here. We all know how important this trial is, how important these issues are, and we know how dependent we are on the expertise that you and other witnesses have brought. And I want to express the appreciation of all of us for the expertise that you have brought to us, the work that you have done to bring it to us, the effort and the inconvenience. So I say thank you.
Thank you very much. Miigwech.
So you, sir, are free.
Those are good words to hear. Do I take these papers or I can just leave them here?
Nothing.
Okay,
Yeah.
very good.
Okay. Thank you all. We'll break for the day to resume, yes, to resume Monday at 10. Then can we go off record for one moment?